First, we're going to have Ryan Wilk speak. And Ryan is the Director of Customer Success for New Data Security. He's going to talk about how it's not just important to stop fraud, but also to work on the customer experience at the same time. So let's begin.
No, great, thank you. So as was already said, my name is Ryan Wilk. I head up the Customer Success Group at New Data Security. I've spent a number of years in the risk industry, primarily on the e-commerce side of the house. I initially founded the Trust and Safety Group for Universal Parks and Resorts, the theme park in Orlando and in Hollywood, California, as well as heading up the transactional trust and safety team for StubHub, an eBay brand ticket marketplace. So our agenda today, we want to talk a bit about banking and mobile banking, talk about what's going on in the industry, how banks are handling this risk, what their appetite for the risk is, and what they're doing to be able to better control the risk, control the issues, and be able to provide a safer, better experience for their customers. So talking a little about the mobile channel, online banking continues to grow by leaps and bounds. On top of that, as you can see here, mobile logins are continuing to outpace web logins by quite a bit. You ask yourself why this is. You look at the various time periods that this happened. You look right around that 2010 to 2012 period. Android was proliferated during that time, opened up easy web access to the entire kind of socioeconomic group, giving more access to easily being able to log in. You can see there that online or that mobile banking, and specifically from mobile devices, has gone up quite a bit and is continuing to grow as more and more folks have mobile devices. So what does that mean? So it means that there's more risk out there. The more people that can access, the more easy access, the more risk it creates. So that creates issues for the customer. But the customer wants to be secure. They want to be protected. And I think customers are willing to give up some information if they know it's being used properly. You look at so much of the security that's used in the banking world today, a lot of it is what I call security theater. I look at my bank and I log in, and sometimes I get a 2FA, sometimes I don't. There's really no rhyme or reason that I've been able to figure out. And because of that, it doesn't make me feel any more secure than had there been nothing there at all. But we can see that about 69% of all consumers would be willing to give up a bit more information about themselves if they knew it was being used in a good way to help protect them and protect their online identity. Then we can also see about 77% are the most concerned of consumers are most concerned about identity theft. It's one of the biggest issues out there today, and it's one of the biggest issues trying to get cleaned up. So you don't want to end up being that institution that is the cause of that person's identity theft, the cause of that person losing their information. You want to create that safe, trusted environment, and consumers are willing to give you that, are willing to go for that. We can see here customers are nervous, and they have a right to be nervous. 67% increase in data breaches since 2010. You see every single day. People don't really think about it as much anymore because you hear on the news every day that someone new's been breached, data is out, whether it be a data breach to try to get information to use for various reasons, such as the Office of Personnel Management we saw just recently, espionage-type data breaches. A Sony-style data breach where the intent is really just to cripple the company. And then you can see one of the most recent ones, the Ashley Madison breach, where it almost looked to be somewhat of hacktivism, where they wanted to humiliate some folks out there and create some havoc. So that continues to be on the rise. We also see that password theft is on the rise as well. Passwords are so interesting. There's a value to them. There's weight. There's good. There's bad. You even look at the UK government's recently put out a press release saying that strong passwords don't make any sense. They're even more risky because you don't remember them. You write them down. They're saved all over the place. So passwords are continuing to become less and less secure as more and more of them are getting out there, and specifically as you're using the same password across every single web environment that you do business with. And then if you are a victim of that type of data breach, you're about 9.5 times more likely, or if your data is part of a breach, you're about 9.5 times more likely to be a victim of identity theft. So that really plays into the idea as well that it's going to happen. So if you're the institution behind it, what are you doing to make sure that doesn't happen and that you're truly protecting your customers? So talking a little about how banks and how these institutions are working with their customers, we see that if a bank is going to reach, so if there's a breach and the bank reaches out to the customer, there's always the risk of losing that customer. About 2.5% of customers will drop off if there is a breach and they're notified of that type of breach, or if there's some sort of fraudulent activity. if the customer finds out on their own, they're about 20% more likely to leave that institution. So it's really going to show that they're placing their trust in you. They're placing their trust in this institution. They want to make sure this institution is protecting them and keeping their data safe, and they want that assurance that the institution's on their side. So mobile banking, that's kind of what we started out talking about. Mobile banking continues to be on the rise. A questionnaire recently to a number of banking institutions anticipated that customer demand for mobile banking is continuing to grow and responding to customer demand. About 100% of all respondents said that's the main reason that they're continuing to invest in mobile banking, is because that's what their consumers want. They want that ease. They want to be able to have access to their data, their information on the run. But there is risk there. We can see that malware across just the regular kind of computer world, the PC world, continues to grow. But we're also seeing now that since about 2015 and the estimates into 16, 17, and 18, is that malware for the mobile device will continue to grow, not quite at the same volume as PC malware, but it will continue to grow at about the same velocity. So we're seeing that continue to spike, and it's becoming more and more risky. As devices become less secure, as more people try to manipulate their devices in various ways, it makes it even more difficult for them to protect these devices than it used to be. So, what are the banks going to do? They need to protect themselves. They need to offer mobile banking, but they also need to protect their customers from potential risks. So we're seeing that about 79% of all banks expect to invest more into mobile banking, mobile capabilities, as well as security to protect those mobile capabilities over the next 2 years. Very high number. A lot of folks are looking into this. So that said, now you have your mobile banking. It's all set up. What are you using to actually validate your consumers? We have usernames and passwords, something you know. We all know how valuable that is. We see these breaches constantly. Usernames and passwords are out there in abundance. You can either find good ones on the dark web. You can just simply Google usernames and passwords. You end up getting lists and pastebin. It's very easy to get a set of usernames and passwords. And then also something they have, the device. Well, that's a nice thing to be able to have. You have that binary check to say, is it the same device? You know the same device is connected. Okay, great. You don't know if it's the same person, but you know it's the same device. What happens if that device changes? You're now back to square zero, where in that binary check, the device no longer matches. You no longer have any sort of assurance that it's the correct customer, other than they entered those data points correctly. So the missing piece there is the human, is the person that's attempting to access this environment, bringing in that idea of behavioral biometrics, saying, I want to understand who this human is behind the machine. I want to understand how they're interacting with the machine. And I want to understand if it is the same human, the same person that's been interacting with me before. So understanding across multiple layers of the device. So, just kind of giving you some quick ideas. Understanding how they scroll, their typing input, the deviations in their typing, the pressure of their typing, angles of the device. I always joke around, but we see certain banking clients where, they sit there and they lay on their back and they hold their phone up like this every night around certain times to check their bank balances. It's a very unique aspect of a person, something that comes from reality that you can bring into the understanding of who that user is. Again, looking at things like location and device, really creating that multidimensional cube to understand who that user is, understanding how they connect, understanding who they are, and understanding what they're doing when they connect. So how the model looks. So having that kind of that multidimensional cube I was talking about there, the knowledge of the user, the device, the machine, the interaction of that user, and then the behavioral actions, looking at how they're actually inputting. Does this input pattern, does it match every other input pattern you've ever seen for that user before? Does the behavior of how that user is interacting and moving through the environment, does it make sense? Has this user never transferred money in their life, and now all of a sudden they're transferring their entire life savings into another account? Strange things like that, things that fall outside the norm. And then also understanding, is this really the correct person or is it not the correct person across all of those layers? So I think I jumped on this one a little bit, but talking more, is this entity behaving like a human? Is it actually a human behind the input, or is it automation? Is it various different types of automation? Knowing those types of things are very important. Even automation that is very sophisticated, things like GUI overlays that are trying to act like a human, actually changing their type speed, changing their input patterns, but being able to identify that it's really not a human, that it's some sort of automation sitting over that website. Is this user behaving like others? So having that visibility to not just the behavior of one user, but the behavior of your entire aggregate population to understand, does this one account that's being created right now, how does this look compared to every other account? Does it appear that there's a single behavioral entity creating hundreds of accounts, logging into hundreds of accounts, even as they're cycling through simple binary data points? And then, is this user acting safely? Is this user acting the way they normally do? Are they interacting the way they normally do within that environment? So talking a little about how you can use this in the real world to be able to slice and dice and look at these users. So potentially in that world of password theft or account takeover, now the password is compromised. They entered it correctly. Well, what does that mean? You've entered the username and the password right. So what? We can say, is it the same device? Okay, well, they might be the same device that they're connecting from. That gives us a level of assurance. But does the correct person actually have that device? One of the things that I've heard from a bank recently that they're worried about with Touch ID is think about college. Think about all these college kids with their mobile devices passed out on the floor. Somebody pulls their phone out of their pocket and sticks their finger on the Touch ID. You now have access to their mobile device. You have access to their online banking. You have access to a lot of things that they probably didn't want you to have access to. So the device might be the same, but is it that same person as well? Is it actually that same person interacting with the device? It creates that whole next layer of identification and understanding of who that user is. So then next idea is a new device. We look at our phones, we look at our PCs. The idea is you want to upgrade all the time. If all the phone companies had their way, you'd be getting a new one every couple months. So that's known. You're going to see people upgrade, but there's usually unique patterns of how that person upgrades. I'm an Apple fanboy. I always buy Apple products. If all of a sudden I started interacting from an Android phone, that would be very, very unusual for me. So it's knowing that if I all of a sudden go from my iPhone 6 to my 6S because I'm going to run out and spend a lot of money I probably shouldn't, we're going to know that I probably upgraded to a new device. It made sense for that continual pattern. But knowing that I have my password right and that it is still Ryan behind that device, and knowing how Ryan interacts on devices, even as potentially he changes those devices, gives you that ability to move beyond some of that binary data check and really understand who that user is. And then finally, the idea of malware. So malware is a tough one, and it's constantly evolving. There are tools out there to be able to check and detect certain types of malware, but if you're monitoring your environment, monitoring how users are behaving, you can very easily understand when malware starts to make itself evident. If it starts to pop out, there's all of a sudden a field that was never there before, and you can see that, hey, wait a minute, why did my user input in 3 fields on a page that should only have 2 fields? We see divergent sessions, divergent IPs. Being able to understand when there's that type of unusual interaction in the behavior, even maybe something like vishing, where you start to see users interacting in a way that doesn't make sense. So being able to know and slice and dice all of those dimensions to really understand who that user is. So getting a little close to the end here, so as your false positives reduce, your customer increase for safety, and then also you see just a better environment. So really when it comes to risk, you kind of change how you look at this. Don't look at it as saying, I want to find the bad actors who make up a very small percentage of your environment. Say, I want to find my good users. I want to identify my good users, give them a fantastic experience, make sure that they get through quickly, everything works out for them, and then take that very small subpopulation that's not your good user and be able to identify them and be able to better stop that risk and give your customers a good interaction. I kind of look at it as the smiley face slider. You have your risk guy, and then you have your operations guy. Normally, they don't go the same way. They go back and forth. But if you can make them both smile, your good customers and your risk in one, you're getting double the benefit. So the eye chart slide. So we're finding that a lot of customers or a lot of banking customers are starting to reduce the use of KBA and out-of-pocket out-of-pocket questions. Not nearly as valuable as they used to be. We are finding that a lot of banks are starting to implement biometrics and passive biometrics to better understand who their users are, giving again that better user experience. Seeing a strong growth in various different types of behavioral analytics in the market, really the next step in understanding what's going on in your environment, who your users are. And then again, just reiterating, 79% of banks are expecting to spend money over the next 2 years on risk prevention and also better mobile technology. So really, I'm part of the group, so I'm going to be a little partial, but I'm finding that the tools that are completely passive are the ones that are the most valuable. You don't want to tell the customer. You want it to be passive to your good customers, so they don't know that anything's going on. And you also want it to be passive to the risk, because you don't want the bad actor to know what's going on. Figure out how to get beyond that. There's a number of different products out there. Some do active things where they're interjecting in the experience. I think the ones that are completely passive and can just monitor the user's activity, make it so that no one even knows they're there, are becoming the most valuable. And it's really being able to take that data and look at that data all at once in real time, and being able to dynamically understand what's changing in that data to understand what the risk is. So kind of the difference between I would call it the difference between active biometrics and passive biometrics, in that active biometrics is something you have on you. Passive biometrics is something that comes out of you. I guess the way you can say it, that you're typing into a machine, you're not realizing you're doing it, and you're just putting that data in, versus actively telling someone you must put your fingerprint down, you must do a retinal scan, something along those lines. And then it also, in the long run, those types of active biometrics have the same risks as username and password. You just look at the Office of Personnel Management breach. There were fingerprints associated with that breach. Now, everyone who was part of that breach has lost all 10 of their biometric passwords. So what do they do now? The bank lets their customer know there's a problem, about a 2.5% drop-off. If the customer finds out on their own, about a 20% drop-off. In the best case scenario, you would have no drop-off because you're figuring this out ahead of time. You're giving your good customers a great experience, understanding when it's no longer your customer, stopping that person from actually being able to create any sort of risk or create any sort of problem within that account, and just creating a safer, better environment. Really, the idea is you don't, regardless of where the data was stolen from, we saw the 67% increase in breaches since 2010. If they come to your institution with that username and password, and they take that customer's data, the customer doesn't care that it happened at Merchant Z 5 years ago. It was you. It's your fault. You have to make it right. And then they're always going to remember it was your institution that caused them to have that loss. So stop that from ever happening.